2023. Tonight, we have Unity Park design update.
No,
And so I guess, Brad, you're on.
Okay, well, thank you. Before I get into that, I wanted to take the opportunity to introduce one of our new employees to the city council, Grant Maskell, who started with us in middle of April. And Grant is our construction project manager. And so he is on board to help us deliver projects, oversee projects, and kind of be the eyes and ears and experts when it comes to certain projects. We got a lot of things going on in the city. And so having that expertise and that set of eyes is absolutely critical. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Grant to the council.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Grant Maskell, project manager for a handful of different projects with the city, including 2023 overlays, the Ruby Street skin patch, and the Unity Park that we are going to be talking about here shortly. Just a little bit about me. I am a graduate of Pietas High School and Central Washington University. And for the past 10 years, I've been in the private sector with a nationwide company doing similar work, managing projects and having them be built on time, quality wise, and safety record, making sure nobody gets hurt. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us. Did you share, Brad?
Kind of what?
Did you share your screen?
Nope, I didn't. Come on over.
it's a race.
They're all coming in every direction. Thank you. Okay, all right. Yeah, just before I get going, Grant is going to be here tonight to answer any questions that you have of more construction related and things like that. And from a staff's perspective, that position is really critical to the operations of the city. And so we appreciate the council's support of that position and funding it. And it has already paid off in tenfold. So anyway, I will launch into the Unity Park update. I know that the council has seen a lot of the information through some of the extra proceedings that we've had related to the park. And so I'm going to touch on a few of the things that have changed a little bit with the design, kind of as we unfold and kind of work through the project and the budget and all of those things. Things are bound to change, and some of the design has been altered a little bit to fit budget and for other purposes. And I'm going to kind of go over those bigger picture items, talk a little bit about the project schedule, and then answer any questions that the council has. And so we will get started. So I think it's important to kind of just ground ourselves and go back to what this place is going to be. And this has been our design principle from the beginning. And I'll read it because I think it's important. Unity Park will be the central space for Ellensburg's daily gatherings and special events. Feel open, inclusive, and welcoming to residents and visitors alike. Support a flexible range of events and types and sizes. Extend the draw of downtown Ellensburg to visitors across 4 seasons and be of Ellensburg. And so even with some of the changes that we've made throughout the process, we've always kind of kept this in mind. We want to keep going back to this and making sure that we are honoring this and staying true to what we set out to accomplish. And I think we still have. So this right here, you've seen this before. This is kind of the original design that went in front of council. And so the elements that are incorporated in this design are still existing in the updated design, which looks like this. And so the main changes that we've seen and that I'll kind of go into more detail is number 8 is the stage layout. So in the original design, it was more kind of angular. And so it kind of ran parallel to the alley, and then it cut across along the north edge of the park. what we've done is we've softened that up and we've kind of created a curve to it. The restroom facility has shrunk in size a little bit. It was originally a 3-hole restroom, all gender neutral stalls. We've taken that down to 2 stalls, and then the water feature has been changed up a little bit as well. So that's really it. There's some minor modifications to some things, but nothing of significant relevance. So again, this is the original stage backdrop. So perforated brick, kind of an angular design that ran along the backside. We went to this look, and this was how this process came about was I met with a couple members from the Arts Commission, as well as somebody who works, I think a member of the Arts Commission, but also works at Central in their stage and theater production department. And they said, hey, we don't know if it's too late, but we would really like you guys to kind of look at changing the design of the stage. And here are the reasons why we want to do it. And they came in with something that looked a little different than this, admittedly. But we said, we'll have the Walker Macy take a look at it, and if it's something that they can incorporate that meets budget, we'll certainly try to do what you guys want to do. I mean, we've had stakeholders involved from the start, and for this reason, they're the experts in a lot of these areas, and they bring events to our community, and we want this facility to reflect what their wants and needs are. And so so we went to Walker Macy, said, hey, is this possible? And they said, yeah, we can take a look at it. And they came up with this type of design. And so really kind of softens that corner a little bit. One of the ideas behind this too was it now creates kind of a more of a platform for a future mural or some type of art installation, and really kind of center the stage and create this visual kind of focal point within the park. And so that isn't represented in this illustration or this concept, but that's kind of the idea long term. And so performers still enter from the front of the stage, and so we don't have anybody coming out the back. The space behind the stage can be used kind of as a quasi green room. We've talked about adding some poles or posts behind there, and I'm talking about the area kind of this it's about a 10 by 10 area back here, but kind of an area where if you have multiple performers at an event, you can kind of stage them back there. They can get out of the have their own quiet space. They can we can set up a shades tent or a structure of some sort, and then they can be ready to play. And so so that's one of the major changes is incorporating that new stage. The concept plan allows for up to about 1,000 people, kind of is the idea in front of the stage area. And so event capacity wise, the smaller shaded brown square, that's 400 people standing is what that reflects, and it assumes with 7 square feet per person. And then in the green illustration here, that's 1,000 people standing in this kind of interior square, and then 1,000 people sitting reflects the larger kind of footprint. And so we can fit an awful lot of people in this area quite comfortably. And then the other thing that they showed was the 10 by 10 tents, and so that's the third drawing there, and I believe there's 44 of them on that picture. The farmers market tents are all 10 by 10 as well. So, and in talking to the market director, and this wasn't communicated to me, but they're beyond capacity at this point. They have a wait list of vendors that want to participate in the market. When we originally started the design of this park, we invited the market to the stakeholder meetings for discussions and get their input, see if they wanted to be a part of it. At that point in time, there wasn't a lot of interest in citing some of the market at this location. But that was back in 2018, 2019. That may have changed over the course of time with the popularity of the market and the number of vendors that they're seeing down there. And so I could see at some point in time a desire to expand the market into this area, and they could do so and provide a lot of extra capacity and space for what they're doing. So. Moving on to the comfort station. Again, we're going from a 3-stall restroom to a 2-stall restroom. But we're maintaining the concierge office area and kind of storage and venue ticketing, that type of thing for events. Again, the idea behind the concierge is to have a space that we can have eyes and ears on the park, especially during the summertime. And so trying to staff that space during the week, hours to be kind of determined later. But just having somebody down there to pick up trash, to make sure that the bathrooms are clean, that it's well stocked, and that there's toilet paper and those little details, having somebody there to make sure that that people using the park are doing so in the way that we want them to be using the park. This is going to be obviously a highly visible facility with a lot of people coming and going out of there, and so having somebody down there that can kind of provide that type of support, even answering questions for people who are coming into town and may not know much about Ellensburg, and they want to know where Central is, or where, who knows, just being kind of a support to the downtown and being that ambassador to our community. When I think about the recreation and tourism program on campus, this is kind of right in their wheelhouse for opportunities for students to be able to gain volunteer practicum hours and internship hours and things like that. So, but bathroom is sited in the same spot. It's just kind of been reduced in size.
Brad, do you want to talk a little bit about the design changes in that facility as well, just with the chase and what the spaces are?
Yeah. We've kind of reconfigured a few things. The exterior, we originally had kind of a perforated wall out in front of the building that broke up kind of the visual of people coming in and out of the space. We really didn't like the look of that very much, so we removed that from the plan. We're going to be looking at adding some type of planter or some type of vegetation there that breaks up. So when people are walking out or walking into the bathroom, it's a little bit more private than what it's shown here. The mechanical and storage behind there, we've kind of moved some things around to make it a little bit more efficient, but while still maintaining enough office space to really make it kind of impactful, and also trying to create some additional storage for groups that are going down and using the space. We don't have any storage underneath the stage or anything like that. We know that for big events, we're not going to be able to provide everything on site. We can't do that. But there are things that we can certainly try to provide. We've attempted to create kind of a window and a flow through here where, if you are ticketing, if it's a ticketed event, you could bring people through the concierge window. They could pay, they can, however the event is being run, but trying to create kind of a flow and a seamless kind of in and out of the park, and really make it as user friendly as we possibly can for the event organizers. They've done a good job of utilizing the bank and trying to make that work to the best of their ability, but there's some constrictions associated with just the design of the space. And so we've really been trying to be intentional and purposeful with it, providing opportunities for art still on the exterior walls, and just creating a multi-use kind of a multi-function, very kind of facility that can be used for a variety of purposes. So the water feature, which has always been kind of of all the elements down there, it's kind of had the widest range of emotions and response in terms of whether people support it or not. Originally we went into the idea of kind of having that spray, that fountain type of concept and experience. We quickly realized that for people that are going downtown with young kids, if they were to go to the park before going shopping or going to lunch or whatever it may be, that if we had that type of facility at the park, that would be the end of their downtown experience, because their kids would be soaking wet and they would have to go home. And so we kind of pivoted from that and went to something that still, kind of serves that purpose of water and gives that water element, but at the same time makes it a little more difficult for somebody's child or grandchild to get soaking wet. They still can. Kids are going to find a way to do that. They just have the ability to do that. But it's not as easy as it originally was. And so we're looking at something that's kind of, kind of more natural in its design. Nick Zentner, who most of you probably know from the university, also serves on the Parks and Recreation Commission. And so we had Walker Macy reach out to Nick directly and said, hey, come up with some design elements and some recommendations for us that really match and kind of mirror our area, geology and just kind of the water features and how would you do that? And so he met with Walker Macy and came up with some suggestions that we've incorporated. And so, being mindful of the fact that this kind of a skim of water more than anything else, and not this massive, swimming pool or splash pad type of feeling, but we wanted to definitely incorporate that, which then, obviously can be turned off during events and things like that. So it's not impacting some of the activities that take place down at the park. So, so we've this is probably the one feature that we have right now that from a cost perspective is still a little bit of a wild card, because we're still kind of going through the design process of that and figuring out what we need to do with the state health department in order to get it approved. So it's still kind of a work in process. And then the element of art, we kind of developed an art action team, so to speak, and trying to get input from the local art community in terms of how we should best utilize the space for art, bring in that feeling and concept of unity. How do we incorporate existing art, put the call out for art for future projects, permanent installations versus temporary installations, all of that. And so that group has met once. We will get that group together kind of in a different format to hopefully get a little bit more information and direction. It was a good conversation, but it we came away from it going, okay, we still have some work to do, but we know that art is a major part of this project, and we need to be mindful of how we plan for art and where we put it and what that is going to look like. And so that's been a thread throughout this process as well. In terms of project schedule, this has changed significantly. We had hoped to be under construction by sometime in June originally. The plan that we laid out from the start was when Central was out of session, after they graduated, that we would begin construction on the park and that it would be closed for the summer and hopefully open sometime in November. Due to budget and looking at kind of how we can manage that, as well as some permitting issues and some other things that have come up, that deadline, that timeline has been pushed back significantly. And so we are actually looking to get out to bid on this project at the end of August, and then start construction sometime in October, or probably mid-October is when we would hope to be under construction, and then complete the project sometime in spring of 2024. It allows us to do some things though, with the art action team. It gives us more time to kind of work through that process. It also allows the events scheduled for the summer to still take place. One of the big concerns that we heard back from the rodeo and fair specifically was the fact that it's the 100th year of the rodeo, and they're anticipating a crowd for the rodeo parade that we haven't seen before. And so there was some concerns about, this is a major part of the parade route where people watch from. And so by bumping the schedule back, we can safely, reassure them that won't be impacted at all. And then hopefully with a good winter, we can do a lot of the, continue to do a lot of the project over the winter and then wrap it up in time for festival season next year. We are starting to see a significant uptick in the number of events that are taking place in Ellensburg again. Prior to COVID, we were starting to see that upswing because we assumed management of this property, and it was easier for event organizers to work with us, and we developed a special event permit. COVID happened, things changed, and we're starting now to see kind of a reboot in activities and events that take place downtown. You saw it last week with the Pride Parade. They're originally going to use Unity Park for a portion of their event. In 2 weeks, Dawson on Parade is coming back using the park, put down in the downtown. And so it's nice to see a lot of events starting back up, and the fact that we can keep this space open and continue that momentum, I think is a positive thing. And I think ultimately, the park was going to be, ready for events next spring. And I think we can still meet that timeline. Really, the only event that utilizes the space between kind of the middle of October through May is Moments to Remember, uses a portion of it. And then the Ellensburg Brew Fest that takes place, they use it to check in, I think, attendees. So the impact on the closure won't be significant. And then just a couple things with the project itself and going out to bid. In discussions with Grant and Walker Macy and kind of moving forward, we are going to look at a few bid alternates for this project. And so the water feature being one of them. We're going to look at the perimeter paving around the park, which really kind of defines the space more than anything else. It's just kind of a visual cue of now you're entering into a park area. Shade structures kind of over the stage and some of the viewing areas. And then the electrical vehicle rough-in, we do want to provide some charging stations on the south end of the park. And so some of the costs associated with that, we want to make sure that we can do everything that we want to do at the park, but still be able to provide that. So we're looking at those bid alternates there. So
Brad, bid alternates, does that mean that depending on the bid, that might impact the design?
So no, so what you do is you have a base bid, this is going to be in the project. And Grant, you can step in and correct me if I'm wrong, but here's the base bid. This is what we're gonna do. And then the bidders provide, a cost for all of these alternates, and we can pick and choose kind of which things that we want to do based on project budget. Close? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
A la carte menu.
Yeah, well, kind of a little bit. Yeah. Yeah,
Choices.
it just provides some flexibility.
I would hope for low bids and then you have more money.
Yep.
Yep. And I would just add that, this has not been a great year to put out public projects. All of the costs for every single project have gone up. We're seeing a little bit of settling, and so we're hoping for the best. We had a budget for this, and so we had a $2.6 million budget for this. And we've been trying to cost the project as we go along to make sure we can fit in the design. And so the alternates really, exactly as the mayor said, allow us kind of an a la carte in case we get high in one area and lower in others. Thank you.
Are you taking questions or?
If you have some questions, yeah,
They're
absolutely.
really easy, so it shouldn't take any. I don't even think you'll need to bring in the professional.
Perfect.
town Manager.
We'll see.
So I was curious on the October timeline for construction. Does that also mean that the demolition of the existing structures will begin at that time or sooner? Possibly?
Correct. At that time, yeah.
Okay. And then on the perimeter paving you just mentioned, is it still the plan to maintain a curb on the Pearl Street side, or is there, I know there was some talk about leveling that so it's a continuous
The rolled curb is not a part of the project right now.
and not a bit alternate? I assume.
No.
And then my last question, the reconfigured band shell, we'll call it. Yeah, are you still planning on using brick, or will it be some kind of acoustical treatment?
The plan is to use brick.
Curb?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Was that your last slide? You get one?
I'm
Yeah, there we go.
look at that. We're done.
We instinctively know when to start asking questions.
Stop
So,
talking.
yeah, this isn't your first time doing it.
Is there any other questions?
Just about the more on the funding, I'm assuming that there aren't any parameters on when we need to spend the money? Or that's been looked into?
Yes, and so the dollars that we set aside, the majority are from ARPA funds, and so we've committed those essentially by council action. And so at this point, that isn't at risk from being removed, but we do have a 2026 timeline, I believe, for spending those dollars, which should be well within that.
Then we have some park impact fees dedicated to it too.
Anyone else?
Okay.
Thank you for the
Thank you.
update.
Yep.
And yeah,
For the long
nice
haul.
work.
Long haul commitment. It's been a
Yeah.
long journey.
So next on the agenda is our legislative update.
Absolutely. Thank you, council. I'll just do a light kickoff and Terry's going to kind of take the first attempt at talking about the Blake fixes. So as you know, this was a pretty active legislative session. The legislature finished a 105-day session. They had one special day to come back and address the Blake case. I believe there were 2,162 bills that were presented during our state legislative session this year. And the legislature and governor took action on about 475 or so of those bills. And so lots of activity. And a lot of those, a number of those that were tracked by AWC that impact cities. We have some pretty significant impacts that we'll be looking at. And so I'm going to start with Terry because probably the high profile cases and legislation was really about public safety. And then I'll step in and do about a 20,000 foot look at some of the other issues that we will be working on. And I have about, I always tell people information is about an inch deep and an acre wide. In this case, it's maybe about a quarter of an inch deep because we haven't been able to dig into all of the legislation at this point too. So we're still learning and looking at how we're going to plan to address these items. So Terry.
Thank you. Terry Weiner, City Attorney. So this is not going to be nearly as exciting as Unity Park, but hopefully equally as important, maybe. Probably you've heard about the Blake case or heard the name tossed around, and I'll talk about the case a little bit, but I want to talk about the state of the criminal law on drug possession prior to this case, which came from the Washington Supreme Court in early 2021. So before the Blake case, possession of a controlled substance was what's called a strict liability offense. That meant that if you were caught with possession of controlled substances, the officer did not have to show that there was an intent to possess if you were possessing the drugs. So merely having the drugs on or about you was enough to result in a potential conviction for possession. It was a felony offense for except for cannabis, which, as you know, has been decriminalized for quite some time, which meant they were prosecuted and tried in the Kittitas County Superior Court. We have two courts in Kittitas County: the Superior Court for more serious crimes, and then the lower district court here in Ellensburg for misdemeanors and gross misdemeanors. And at the time in 2021, Washington was the only state of the 50 states that actually had a strict possession, strict liability possession law. So it was obviously pretty much of an outlier there. So in February of 2021, the state considered the case of State versus Blake. And the question that was posed to them was, can unintentional, unknowing possession of a controlled substance be criminalized? So a lot of times someone would be, for instance, driving their car and they would get pulled over for some offense, and then there might be a search for whatever reason. They find drugs that would fall under the felony possession statute, and they'd say, hey, I borrowed the car. It was not my car. I didn't know it was there. Whatever the reason was, they would claim a lack of intent. Well, under Washington law at the time, that was not a defense. The Washington Supreme Court noted in that case, when faced with that question, that Washington's law is unique in the nation in criminalizing entirely innocent, unknowing possession. Whether all possessions were unknowing and innocent, that's a question for the jury, but that's the way that the Washington Supreme Court looked at it. And they decided that strict liability law violated the due process clauses of both the state and federal constitution and struck it down. At the point they struck it down, then that meant as of February 2021, there was no criminal law that was in place for possession of controlled substances. So kind of a huge vacuum at that point. People could not be arrested or charged unless it was coupled with some other crime. intent with, or possession with intent to distribute and other similar types of crimes. So as a result of the legislative session that was ongoing at that point when Blake came out, there was a temporary fix that was passed and signed into law by the governor effective July 25th of 2021, so about 2 years ago. It added the knowingly element, which was missing from our state law, and it reduced the crime from a felony to a misdemeanor. But it was a bit problematic for our law enforcement and prosecutors because it required 2 referrals for treatment before someone could even be charged with the crime and prosecuted. And the problem with that was that we didn't have a statewide system for tracking these, so someone could go from one county to another, and one law enforcement agency wouldn't necessarily know if the other one had already referred the person. There was not a statewide system for tracking this, so it was pretty difficult to enforce that. And as you'll see later, prosecution or arrest for possession cases went way down after this fix went into place. So now we flash forward to the legislative session this year, and you probably heard or read at some point that the legislature worked up until the last day of the session to try and come up with a fix. We called it the Blake fix. It went through the Senate. The Senate thought they had a bill that was acceptable to the House. Went to the House. The House said, no, we don't. One of the big conflicts was that the Senate bill made drug possession a gross misdemeanor, which is a little bit higher level of a misdemeanor. It involves more jail time and a higher fine. The House wanted it to be a misdemeanor. There were some other differences as well. Because the Senate wouldn't concur with the House version, it goes to it then went to the conference committee where members of each House get together and try and work out a resolution. They thought they had a resolution on, I think the last day of the session was a Sunday. They worked out a resolution late Saturday. They went to back into session on Sunday, and lo and behold, they could not get bipartisan support for what the conference committee had come up with. So it failed, and then we had sine die, and that was the end of the session in essence. Fortunately, a special session was called in May, and they were able to work out the details of the bill before the special session started, so that the original bill, which was Senate Bill 5536, was passed with pretty large margins of bipartisan support. So what is the Blake fix? Well, for one, it now adds the element that it's got to be either knowing possession or knowing use of a controlled substance. So this will cover things like we've been dealing with. You heard the Chief Wade's annual report at the last meeting. So we've had a huge explosion of fentanyl use and distribution, counterfeit substances, opioids. Those are sort of the common ones that we think of under this law: methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine. It's got sort of a 2-tiered penalty system. So although it's a gross misdemeanor, the first 2 convictions limit the jail time to 180 days and $1,000 fine. Upon the 3rd conviction, that is ramped up to 364 days in jail. Again, we're talking about prosecution and conviction in the lower district court, not the Superior Court. It's not a felony. It is a gross misdemeanor. Some of the other elements of the Blake fix are that although there's no longer the referrals required that were in the temporary Blake fix, the law enforcement and prosecuting attorney are encouraged to offer referral to treatment in lieu of prosecution. There is a pretrial diversion program that's sort of very complex that's laid out in the bill, but it's dependent upon the counties having a program in place that can result in those referrals actually being made. Here in Kittitas County, we don't really have the means or the resources to implement that, and we're relying on our existing services, which includes behavioral health court, which we've spoken to before, and that's for referrals in the lower district court for substance use disorders and mental health disorders. Those are for people who have already been charged. We also have a pre-filing diversion, but it's for really relatively minor crimes not involving drug possession. So the impacts that we anticipate to the city, this is these are statistics provided by EPD for drug offenses that were resulted in arrests starting in 2011 all the way through this year to date. And what I would like you to pay attention to is the green bars here are for felony prosecutions. The red is the total. So green's formerly felony prosecutions, and the gray is misdemeanors. So you can see that felonies, let's see if I can sort of pull this up a little, sorry. The caption is blocking it a little bit. Oops, lost it again. Who's coming to help me? I can. Yeah. Let me just get rid of it. There we go. Thank you. So you can see through 2020, really, the felony prosecutions were, averaging in the mid 40s, high 50s. 2020, the year before Blake, we're up to 66. And then you can see the drop off, pretty dramatic drop off after the Blake decision in 2021. What's going to happen now is that these former felony cases are now going to be pushed down to our office for our city prosecutor, Aaron, to be handling. So there will no longer be any, for pure possession cases, there will no longer be any prosecution by the county's felony unit of those cases. So the impact from that is that we're going to have the additional case burdens on our, not just our prosecutor, but our staff. I mean, there's a lot of staff work from our executive system that goes into preparing these cases. There's also the potential for increased indigent defense costs. As you may recall, we spoke quite some time ago about the fact that that Kittitas County was standing up a Office of Public Defense, which they now have. So the what we would refer to commonly as public defenders are now employed by the county. And at some point, the county may be requesting that we participate in funding those activities, and usually that's based on caseload numbers. And we're going to have a higher caseload number, presumably starting later this year into next year. So that could be an additional cost. The other additional cost that EPD is going to probably incur is jail costs. So felony cases, upon conviction, that person goes to state prison, and the Department of Corrections, the state correction, is responsible for those costs, and they're funded for that. Misdemeanor charges, when someone is sitting in the county jail on charges filed resulting in conviction by the city, those jail costs are paid by EPD as part of its budget, so paid by the city. If we now have felony cases that formerly for those defendants going to state prison, being paid by the state, those are now going to be coming down to the city, and we're going to be responsible for paying those jail costs. And we pay those to Kittitas County. So there's going to be some extra costs. There's also occasionally medical expenses. We're obligated to pay medical expenses for prisons, for city defendants who are in the county jail for medical treatment they are required to undergo while they're in jail. That's a quick overview, and I'm happy to take questions if you got them.
Questions, anyone?
Just the term, the pretrial diversion, is that kind of like settling before going to trial? You do things that say you'll like some support services or something to avoid a trial?
Well, in the bill, what it means is that people are being referred to treatment services, and they have to comply with those in order to not have either a filing charge against them, or if it's already been filed, to not have if they meet those conditions, they can have the charges dismissed if it's already been filed.
And that,
But it's specifically for here, it's substance use disorder treatment.
okay, and that can help mitigate the costs overall. Would that be a
It can. Again, we have very limited services available here in the county, which is one of the downsides of that. But we do have some 1/10 of 1% money going to the county, and hopefully we'll be standing up some more services countywide to try and address that.
But we do have a drug court, so there is a process available.
The drug court is we have two different courts. Behavioral health court is in the lower district court. The drug court is actually a felony drug court in the Superior Court. And I'm not sure we know exactly what's going to happen with that. They obviously have an existing caseload that is going to keep going, but I don't know what will happen in terms of the future, since there'll be very few, if any, felony drug cases. Drug possession cases, I should say.
I had a question about on page 8, the AWC recap, there's a
This
the
one,
legislature provided 11 of
Oh.
of our agenda. Sorry.
that's okay.
They appropriated 11.5 million in continued funding to reimburse cities for vacating simple drug possession convictions. That's listed under the Blake decision?
Yes.
So did we have a lot of vacated?
I don't think we've had any
convictions?
yet, have we? Pam. Come on up. Aaron Ryman is our city prosecutor, and he deep in this.
Thanks, yeah. So when Blake came out, we did a search through our database to see what active cases. So at that time, it was marijuana cases, cannabis cases, since we didn't have any felonies. So any active possession of marijuana case, use of drug paraphernalia, those types of cases, we dismissed those that we had that were active. And because the Blake decision focused only on felonies, it didn't say anything about misdemeanors, gross misdemeanors. There was some discussion about whether or not city prosecutors, municipalities should also be dismissing marijuana cases. The prosecutor network, we all shared emails, talked about it. We all decided, yeah, it's probably the right thing to do to dismiss those cases as well. So we did end up dismissing some, but we've taken the position that we're waiting for defendants who have those cases to come forward to request vacation of their charges. So the impact hasn't been very high yet. I don't expect it to be that high. But yeah, that's kind of where we are now.
I had one question. I was just curious, the 364-day maximum sentence for the third strike, so to speak, is that it's something in my distant memory reminded me that there's a time frame, a limit for when a person can be incarcerated locally versus sent out to a state facility.
Felonies
About
for
a
a year
year,
more.
isn't it?
Yeah.
So is that, it's not a coincidence that 364 is the magic number? No.
But you can stack. But for any individual offense, somebody can spend more than a year in the local jail, but it has to be for consecutive.
Different offenses. Okay.
Yeah, well, that's on that same note too. So if they were to take the treatment in lieu of prosecution, that wouldn't count towards one of their 3 strikes essentially. Because it wouldn't actually be a conviction.
Yeah, it has to be an actual conviction.
I guess the last question I was going to ask is what do you anticipate the process will be to quantify the additional cost in terms of prosecution, city increases in cases? Is that something that we'll get our arms around
It'll,
half of the year going into next year? And
I think it'll take probably through the end of 24 to really know. The biggest part of the law isn't effective really until August of this year. So, and then you have to wait for the cases to kind of work their way through. I wouldn't expect us to really see the impacts starting to ramp up until next year.
Heidi, we left you 6 minutes. to run through all of the rest of the legislature?
So I want to do kind of a drive-by legislative update for the rest of the general. Your council packet actually includes the AWC materials, and I think they did a really great job reviewing, doing a high-level overview of some of the major legislation that was passed that affects cities. Lots of housing bills. I think we've talked already about House Bill 110 with a missing middle that mandates the fourplexes and duplexes, and in some cases sixplexes in different types of zonings. Again, the city doesn't meet the threshold for the 25,000 population, but I know there's been discussion about how we move forward implementing our housing action plan that reflects some of these responsibilities as well, or some of those interests in our community. There was some action for objective design review, and also really an ADU mandate that we'll be evaluating. And again, as I mentioned in my disclaimer, that we are just in the initial stages of digging into these policies. What I did is I actually took the AWC list, and then we did some additional research on energy, and we looked at the highlighted bills are those that we'll dig into first, that we believe will have the most direct and or immediate impact for us. And so this will mean additional study by our boards and commissions and council, sometimes internal administrative policies or procedure changes, and sometimes it will mean impacts to budgets and also policies at our city level. So lots to do. It seems like a lot more than some years, but sometimes just taking a broad look from the beginning and making sure we have a work plan to address that is really important. So again, housing bills were front and center they are for a lot of communities. Housing affordability is a big thing in all of our cities across Washington state and really across the country. There's some work to amend some of our sales tax credits, also to really create more tools to exempt housing developments consistent with a comp plan. And when the comp plan analysis is completed under SEPA. And so those will be some big issues that we'll look at rather than doing SEPA at a project level, looking at doing it at a comp plan level potentially, and how does that impact our community? And then let's see here, getting into my 3 minutes. Lots for environmental and transportation. There was a bill looking at integrating climate change into the Growth Management Act. And so resiliency, and now it has to be incorporated into comp plans. And then also for larger cities, greenhouse gas emissions actually have to be dealt with at a comp plan level as well. And cities under 25,000 under Senate Bill 5457 have the ability to adopt county critical areas ordinance as opposed to doing their own. And then one of the highlights, I think, Senate Bill 5452 allows transportation impact fees for bicycle and pedestrian facilities that aren't within right-of-ways. And so again, more tools to help in funding infrastructure, and then more policy objectives as well. I think a couple others I would highlight that affect us for the HR and labor relations bills, the funding for the paid family medical leave premiums that's increasing. That was a well-used program during COVID. And so there's been a need to increase those premiums, and some better communication through employment security about those communications. Let's see here, fast track. Terry talked about some of the public safety bills, and I guess one of the things I would mention, one of the things that's going to impact our utilities is there were some protections, and I can't remember the bill specifically, protections for cutting off utilities for non-payment during heat events, extreme weather events. And so that actually implementation on that is July 23rd, 2023. And so our staff are already working at that, looking at how we implement that and manage that to identify individuals and make sure that we are paying attention to the degree days as well. So, so you have it in your packet. If you have specific questions, a lot of these will come back to you over the next few months and or years potentially. And we'll keep you posted on that. And one mention I do want to make, one thing we added to our legislative agenda this year was the field house. That was a late addition because we had a late crisis on December 2nd with the field house fire. And we had put together a request and a project plan to look at funding that and trying to rebuild within the next 2 years. We did put in a request at the state level for $2 million. We did get from our 13th district that that was a little high. And it was not funded. And I just have to say thank you to Steve DuPont, who's sitting in the audience here too. CWU was helpful in sharing their advocacy for that project. We will head back with other partners to the state to see if we can get some dollars. As Mayor Lilquist will attest to, we had Congresswoman Schreier in our office. We had also made a $7 million request for the field house, and that project is moving forward through appropriations through the Rural Development and Community Facilities Fund. So we had the opportunity to share more about that project with her and her staff. They're very supportive, and we continue to gain the partners, and we're looking for additional funding for that project. So with that, I would stand for questions as long as they don't go too deep into any specific detail.
Does anyone have quick questions? I'm just curious about the SEPA at the comp plan level. Does that mean like, so would critical areas, so when we make folks do a critical areas assessment of a parcel before they build, is that part of SEPA? And so are we going to have to like identify all of the wetlands ahead of time?
We would have to, and again, making sure that you have policies and the in-depth analysis at that high level for comp plan adoption. You want to make sure we'd have the policies. So there's a lot of work in order to get to that planning level at a high level. So you have the details covered at the project level. So we're going to need to do some more work on that. And yes, and the separate was the critical areas for smaller cities. You can adopt the county's critical areas. And so that was. So I don't know if you're mixing the two.
Yeah,
or if that
no,
was separate.
I was just, usually people take irrigation off and then there's no wetlands. So I'm not sure how it will be an interesting
Lots
process.
to be determined with that.
Okay.
Quick question. Quick, on the budget outcome slide, the 400 million that's identified for the Housing Trust Fund. Do we have any feel for whether any of that funding would fit with any of our near-term housing project needs?
We have not done that analysis yet. My guess is yes. And we also know that there is a fair amount for housing and homelessness. And we know that with our discussion of a sleep center, we believe that there will be some money available for supporting that project as well.
Okay, we will be back at 7 o'clock.
Thank you.